inflation has really surprised many economists. Were you one of them? Or did you expect inflation when first sort of COVID hit?
No, when COVID first hit, everybody expected deflation.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody, including in the Netherlands, there were predictions of a very serious recession, bigger recession than after the great financial crisis of 2007 and 8, which was a serious recession. So that was very dramatic. And in such a recession, house prices would start dropping. It would be deflation probably as well, more likely than inflation. Very soon, after the first few months, when government had stepped in, it was clear that there was not going to be such a serious recession. In the end, things turned out to be much more positive. You look at the growth path of the economy, it went down, but then it returned to the previous growth path. So in that sense, nothing was lost really at the cost of very large increase in government debt.
Yeah, and that overall, right?
And well, especially government debt. Yeah. And therefore, that brought back inflationary pressure, which was already present before this. But I think the real increase in inflation before the war in Ukraine was already mostly because of energy prices. It's a different story for the United States, but in Europe, wages were not a reason for increase in inflation because wages were still not growing very fast. And the biggest reason was the increase in energy prices because President Putin of Russia was already playing a geopolitical game, creating uncertainty about natural gas deliveries before the Ukraine crisis. And this coincided with the restart of the global economy and global value change, which were not functioning well yet. And on the other end, there was all this money piled up in consumers' bank accounts because of government support during the COVID crisis. So there was too much demand, not enough supply, plus energy price uncertainty, and this combined into a rise in inflation after the worst of the COVID crisis seemed over last year. Mm-hmm. And I think the most widespread expectation, at which I also held, was that there would be inflation which would peak in the summer of 2022, so about now, in maybe the autumn, and then would go down again. Nobody would know exactly to which levels, but probably it would be structurally higher than the ultra low inflation levels that we've seen over the last 10 years, but nothing like we've seen now. And only when Putin decided to invade Ukraine and when the sanction follows and the whole disruption there, that's when inflation really shot up a lot in the first place. And also it is now unlikely that inflation is going to, or that the high price levels are going to go away very soon. Inflation itself, so the rise in prices may stop after a while, but the prices, especially energy prices, but energy goes into everything. They're not likely to come down to the levels that they were because we don't want to buy gas from Russia anymore. Most European countries don't want to do that. Yeah. So there's going to be energy scarcity, so higher prices. That is likely to remain the case. Yes.
And that's mostly Europe and the rest of the world story because the US has so much of its own gas. Although, of course, if a market is connected, it should be there.
Yes.
As well.
So the energy problem is the energy from Russia problem is mostly a gas problem, and Russia sells most of its gas to Europe, nothing to the United States, I think, even. And also, the United States has its own energy supplies, much more than Europe. And in the United States, to an extent, rising wages play a relatively larger role. I say this very cautiously because it's very unclear how large that role is actually.
But do you think that there is a large demand side story in the US?
Oh yes, I think so. Yeah, because demand versus supply story, because the global supply chain problem is also there for the US. Mm-hmm. So China is still in lockdown partly, and that's a big problem for US suppliers.
No, but I mean more because you sort of alluded to inflation in Europe is largely an energy story, but US inflation has mostly been a little bit higher than European inflation. So what explains that US inflation then was also higher? More stimulus in the US, or is that unfair?
So I say this all very cautiously because I think nobody really knows how much of what percentage of the inflation are explained by what factors. But I think in the US, it's a combination of the amount of money that the government has poured into the economy during COVID, and the supply problems that are still important for the US economy, given that it imports most of its a lot of its consumer goods.
Yeah. Okay, and then this is a final question within the time limit that we set. Then it's up to you. So this is a notification for you as well that your other appointments are also calling, even though I will still be here to answer questions from the chat as well.